The right to resist is a fundamental principle of international law. It recognizes the inherent right of people to resist oppression. This right is enshrined in various international treaties, including the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The right to resist is not absolute. It is subject to certain limitations. These limitations are designed to protect innocent lives. The right to resist has its roots in natural law, which emphasizes the inherent rights of individuals. These rights exist independently of any government or legal system. Throughout history, people have invoked the right to resist. They have resisted tyranny, colonialism, and other forms of oppression. The right to resist is a testament to the human spirit. It reflects the enduring desire for freedom and justice. The right to resist is not merely a legal concept, it is a moral imperative. When individuals are subjected to systematic oppression, they have a moral duty to resist. This resistance can take many forms, whether peaceful or violent. The legitimacy of resistance depends on the circumstances. The right to resist is essential for the protection of human dignity. It empowers individuals to challenge injustice and serves as a safeguard against tyranny. The international community has a responsibility to uphold the right to resist and must support those who struggle for freedom and self-determination. History is replete with examples of resistance movements. These movements have varied in their tactics and goals, but they share a common thread: the pursuit of justice. One of the most iconic examples is Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent resistance movement in India. Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, or truth force, inspired millions and led to India's independence from British rule. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela's struggle against apartheid is another powerful example. Mandela and the African National Congress, ANC, used a combination of non-violent resistance and armed struggle to bring an end to the racist regime. These movements demonstrate the power of collective action. The American Civil Rights Movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., employed non-violent civil disobedience to challenge segregation and racial discrimination. The movement's success in achieving landmark legislation demonstrates the effectiveness of peaceful resistance. From the streets of Birmingham to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, ordinary people displayed extraordinary courage. Resistance movements often face brutal repression. Despite the risks, individuals and communities have risen up and demanded their rights. The courage of those who resist oppression continues to inspire. Their stories serve as a reminder that change is possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Palestinian struggle against Israeli occupation is a contemporary example of the right to resist. For decades, Palestinians have endured displacement, dispossession, and military rule. Their resistance takes various forms, including peaceful protests, boycotts, and armed struggle. The Palestinian people's right to resist is rooted in international law. The UN Charter recognizes the right of self-defense against armed attack. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, has affirmed the legality of resistance against occupation. The Palestinian territories are considered occupied territory under international law, despite Israel's claims to the contrary. The international community has condemned Israel's settlement expansion. Israel's construction of settlements in the West Bank is considered a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power from transferring its civilian population into occupied territory. The Israeli occupation has had a devastating impact on Palestinian lives, resulting in economic hardship, restrictions on movement, and denial of basic freedoms. Despite facing overwhelming military force, Palestinians have continued to resist. Their struggle has garnered international attention and sparked a global movement for Palestinian rights. The Palestinian case highlights the ongoing challenges of occupation and the enduring significance of the right to resist. It also underscores the need for a just and lasting solution based on international law and respect for human rights. International law provides a framework for understanding the right to resist. The UN Charter, a cornerstone of international law, recognizes the inherent right of self-defense. Article 51 of the Charter states that nothing shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs. This right applies not only to states, but also to peoples under colonial or foreign domination. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights further affirms the right to resist oppression. Article 3 of the Declaration states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. This right implies the right to defend oneself against threats to these fundamental rights. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, echoes this principle. The ICCPR recognizes the right of peoples to self-determination. This includes the right to freely determine their political status and pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. The right to resist is an integral part of the right to self-determination. It empowers people to struggle against oppression and achieve their right to freedom and independence. International legal instruments provide a legal basis for the right to resist. They also establish limitations on the use of force. Resistance movements must adhere to the principles of international humanitarian law. These principles include distinction, proportionality, and the avoidance of unnecessary suffering. Section 5. The Fourth Geneva Convention Protecting Civilians in Times of Conflict. The Fourth Geneva Convention is a crucial international treaty that provides protection to civilians during times of war and occupation. Adopted in 1949, the Convention sets out rules for the treatment of civilians in occupied territories. It prohibits an occupying power from transferring its civilian population into occupied territory. It also forbids collective punishment, torture, and other forms of ill treatment. The Fourth Geneva Convention is applicable to the Palestinian territories. This is because the international community considers them to be under Israeli occupation. Israel, however, disputes this characterization. Despite numerous UN resolutions affirming the applicability of the convention, Israel has consistently violated its provisions. Israel's settlement enterprise in the West Bank, its blockade of the Gaza Strip, and its use of administrative detention are all considered violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention. These violations have had a devastating impact on the Palestinian civilian population. The international community has condemned these violations. The International Committee of the Red Cross, or ICRC, has repeatedly called on Israel to uphold its obligations under the convention. The ICRC emphasizes that the convention is not a political document. It is a humanitarian instrument designed to protect civilians in times of conflict. The Fourth Geneva Convention remains a vital legal framework for holding Israel accountable for its actions in the occupied Palestinian territories. Section 6. Resistance versus terrorism, drawing a clear distinction. The terms resistance and terrorism are often conflated in political discourse. It is essential to draw a clear distinction between these two concepts. Resistance movements are legitimate actors. They are fighting against oppression. They are bound by international law. Terrorist organizations, on the other hand, deliberately target civilians. Terrorists aim to spread fear and chaos. Legitimate resistance movements distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. They adhere to the principles of international humanitarian law. Terrorist groups do not make this distinction. They often use indiscriminate violence. This causes widespread suffering. The use of violence by resistance movements is a complex issue. In certain circumstances, the use of force may be justified as a last resort. This is when all other means of resisting oppression have been exhausted. However, the use of force must always be proportionate. It must comply with international humanitarian law. The fight against terrorism should not be used as a pretext. States should not suppress legitimate resistance movements. The international community must support efforts to combat terrorism. It must do so while upholding the right to resist oppression. Section 7. The Moral Imperative, supporting legitimate resistance movements. Supporting legitimate resistance movements is not only a legal obligation, it is a moral imperative. When people are subjected to oppression, they have a right to resist. The international community has a moral duty to support them. This support can take various forms. It can include diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, or military aid. The form of support should be tailored to the specific circumstances of each case. It should be guided by the principles of international law and human rights. Silence in the face of oppression is not neutrality, it is complicity. When we fail to support those who are fighting for their freedom, we become complicit in their oppression. Supporting legitimate resistance movements is an act of solidarity. It is an affirmation of our shared humanity. It is a recognition that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. By supporting those who struggle for freedom, we contribute to the creation of a more just and equitable world. The struggle for freedom and justice is a long and arduous one. It requires courage, determination, and unwavering belief in the possibility of change. By supporting legitimate resistance movements, we honor the sacrifices of those who have fought for a better world. We reaffirm our commitment to the pursuit of justice for all. Section 8. International Solidarity. Amplifying the voices of the oppressed. International solidarity plays a crucial role in amplifying the voices of the oppressed. When people around the world unite in support of a common cause, they can exert significant pressure on oppressive regimes. This solidarity can take various forms. These forms include protests, boycotts, divestment campaigns, and advocacy within international organizations. The global anti-apartheid movement is a powerful example of international solidarity. People from all walks of life came together to demand an end to South Africa's racist regime. Through boycotts, sanctions, and international pressure, the movement helped bring about the dismantling of apartheid. Similarly, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions (BDS) movement aims to pressure Israel to comply with international law. This movement has gained significant traction in recent years. It calls for boycotts of Israeli products, divestment from Israeli companies, and sanctions against the Israeli government. International solidarity can provide a lifeline of hope to those struggling for freedom and justice. It can help break down barriers of isolation and fear. It can create a sense of shared purpose and collective action. By amplifying the voices of the oppressed, international solidarity can help shift the balance of power and create a more just and equitable world. Section 9. The Path to Self-Determination. Resistance as a catalyst for change. Resistance movements often play a catalytic role in the struggle for self-determination. By challenging the status quo, they can pave the way for political, social, and economic transformation. Resistance can take many forms. These forms range from non-violent civil disobedience to armed struggle. The choice of tactics depends on the specific context. Factors such as the nature of the oppression, the balance of power, and the level of popular support all influence the chosen tactics. The Indian independence movement, led by Mahatma Gandhi, is a prime example of non-violent resistance leading to self-determination. Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, or truth force, mobilized millions of Indians. This movement led to India's independence from British rule in 1947. The Palestinian struggle for self-determination also highlights the role of resistance. For decades, Palestinians have resisted Israeli occupation through various means. These means include protests, boycotts, and armed struggle. While the path to Palestinian statehood remains elusive, their resistance has kept the issue alive on the international agenda. Resistance movements can create space for dialogue and negotiation. By demonstrating the strength of popular opposition, they can compel oppressive regimes to reconsider their policies. Resistance can also raise awareness about injustice and mobilize international support. While resistance alone may not always lead to immediate self-determination, it often serves as a catalyst for change. It can lay the groundwork for a more just and equitable future. By challenging the status quo and demanding their rights, resistance movements can inspire future generations to continue the struggle for freedom and self-determination. Section 10. Challenges and controversies. Navigating the complexities of resistance. While the right to resist oppression is widely recognized, its application in practice is often fraught with challenges and controversies. One key challenge is determining the legitimacy of resistance movements. In some cases, it may be difficult to distinguish between legitimate resistance and acts of terrorism or criminal violence. Another challenge is ensuring that resistance movements adhere to international humanitarian law. The use of force, even in self-defense, must be proportionate and discriminate. It must not target civilians. Balancing the right to resist with the need to protect innocent lives is a delicate and complex task. The role of external actors in supporting or opposing resistance movements also raises ethical and political questions. Interference in the internal affairs of another state is generally prohibited under international law. However, the international community has a responsibility to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. Determining when and how to intervene in support of resistance movements or to prevent atrocities is a complex and often controversial issue. Navigating the complexities of resistance requires careful consideration of legal principles, ethical dilemmas, and the potential consequences of action or inaction. It demands a nuanced understanding of the specific context and a commitment to upholding human rights and international law. The international community must strive to find ways to support legitimate resistance movements while discouraging violence and protecting civilians. Section 11, Conclusion. The enduring significance of the right to resist. The right to resist oppression is a fundamental principle of international law and a cornerstone of a just and equitable world order. From the American Revolution to the Indian independence movement to the Palestinian struggle against occupation, history is replete with examples of people resisting tyranny, colonialism, and other forms of injustice. While the right to resist is not absolute and must be exercised within the framework of international law, it remains an essential tool for individuals and communities seeking to secure their fundamental rights and freedoms. Supporting legitimate resistance movements is not only a legal obligation but also a moral imperative. The international community has a responsibility to stand with those struggling for freedom and self-determination and to hold oppressive regimes accountable for their actions. By amplifying the voices of the oppressed, providing material support, and applying diplomatic pressure, the international community can contribute to the creation of a world where the right to resist is respected and where all people are free from oppression. The struggle for freedom and justice is an ongoing one. It requires constant vigilance, unwavering commitment, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. The right to resist is a testament to the enduring human spirit, the indomitable will to fight for a better future, and the belief that change is possible even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds.